Hello everyone, welcome to MythMake week 3. Today we're going over pantheons. We'll talk about what a pantheon is in 1 second. We're delighted to see you. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun today. I'm very excited about our activity. I think it's gonna be a good creative space. Okay, so now we're getting into the thick of it. So
Getting into the business.
business. So basically, a pantheon it's a fancy term for the family of gods that a mythology has. So when you think pantheon, you're gonna want to think specifically, for religion or mythology. You're gonna want to think like gods, and a lot of the times you're gonna want to think something like a family tree, right? This would be the pantheon. Is this Greek? It's just an image I found that looked like a good family tree, but
It's a Greek mythology tree.
Yes.
oh, the Olympians!
Yes.
Ooh,
No, no.
fancy. So nice. Okay.
Fancy.
So this is like a example of what a Greek pantheon would look like. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that in a second. The other thing about pantheons is a lot of the time they can be useful for understanding a specific mythology's culture, or at least their values. So for example, when we look at something like we're not going to talk about it, but a Mesopotamian pantheon, there's a lot of gods who have to do with natural phenomena. So you can assume that the Mesopotamians cared a lot about nature. So normally bigger gods will have roles that are closer to like core values of a mythology. We won't get into that as much, but I thought it'd be interesting to mention, just to, when you're looking at things, to think about, what they mean in terms of the actual mythology. I'm not in present mode. I'm gonna put in
Just
present.
plain things.
Here,
like-
wait.
Oh, a computer. What does that have?
Well,
Yes, Greek mythology, family tree.
what I'm just saying is that normally, so for example, when we look at Egyptian mythology, a lot of the gods have to do with paranormal things. The original gods, one had to do, well, obviously Ra has to do with the sun, but there's a lot of paranormal phenomena. Set is evilness and chaos, and Osiris is god of the dead, and he's also married to Isis, who's a very important figure, who's like a nice person. And so you can tell from that, you can't always tell, but you can think about it, and you'll see that Egyptian mythology has a big emphasis on balance between good and evil. So that's a quick example. It's not a very good example, but that's like the Egyptian kind of thing. Anyway,
There are a bunch of different pantheons in the Greek universe. There's titans, there's gods, primordial beings that we talked about last week with the creation and like the titans and stuff. But the main pantheon is the gods. Like there's a bunch of them: Zeus, Hera, Ares, Athena, whatever. There's the list there. But these are the Greek pantheons, and it's just a bunch of gods that the Olympians live up in the mountain Olympus. They're just vibing.
Good job.
all right, Red's turn.
As for Norse, there are kind of two sets of Norse gods, which are the Vanir and the Aesir. I think that's how you pronounce it. I pronounced it wrong last time.
They got hard
So
words.
Vanir gods are like the older ones, and they're more associated with like the earth and different parts of the earth, whereas the Aesir gods are the younger ones, and they're associated with the sky. So again, kind of like earth and sky. So these two families of gods used to be at war, but eventually they both settled together in Asgard. And this war kind of represented competing variations of religion between different Norse people, who probably worshipped like different variations of the gods, or different gods depending on their region. And many of the gods in the Norse pantheon are very like violent and warlike, which is mostly because the Vikings were pretty violent and warlike.
Would you say that they're meanies?
A little bit, kind of, not always.
Egyptian. Before I get into it, I asked this before for our first day. We had one student, but do you guys, before I go into some of them, do you guys know any Egyptian gods off the top of your head? Off the top of your hat?
Horus? I might
Horus, yep,
Yeah.
that's one. He's very important. He's like he's associated with pharaohs. We'll talk about why Horus is important in a second.
Ra.
God of the sun.
Rasputin.
I see Hathor.
I also know Hathor. like one other goddess I don't really remember her name though.
Isis, were you thinking
Isis.
of?
I also know Isis.
Isis, yep. She's pretty important. She's married to the god of the dead. All right. So it looks like people know quite a few from this particular mythology. So let's get into it. The Egyptian pantheon is troubling. I mentioned this before when we talked about the summary of Egyptian mythology on the first day. But Egyptian mythology, Egypt was around for a long time. They had about 3,000 years worth of their particular dynasty in Egypt. So a lot of people didn't know how to read back then. A lot of times you would take things to a script. There are people who know how to read, but there weren't that much reading. And so it's kind of like the way these stories were told was like a 3,000 year generation by generation game of telephone. So obviously things are going to get real confusing real fast. So I'm going to tell you the basis of the stories I know. There are many other stories, but we'll get to those. So let's start where we start with the creation myths. And the creation myth of Egypt normally goes that one god created himself out of the waters of Nun, which is nothingness. I'm going to go with Ra, because Ra is more commonly recognized. But depending on the time span, you'll either hear Ra or another god named Atum. So Ra, who's the sun god, as we mentioned before, created himself. He was a real self-made man. And once he created himself, he thought it was sad that there was nothing. And so he sneezed and coughed out these two gods named Shu and Tefnut. The god of dry air and moist air, I forget which one's which. These two gods ended up being in a relationship, and they gave birth to two other gods named Nut and Geb. Nut. Here, wait. So this is a picture of Nut and Geb. These two were in love at birth. And then Shu and Tefnut didn't want them to be in a relationship. So Shu ended up pushing them away from each other, creating the earth and the sky. Sorry, this is Geb and this is Nut. But they had some children. A lot of the children were the stars that Nut has. But a lot of there was a couple other children, okay? So the rest of the children make the Aeneid. Here's a stock image of Set. He's real angry in this picture.
He angry.
He might be Anubis, I'm not sure.
One of them.
Nut and Geb had many children. Most of them stars, but also the rest of them completed the Aeneid. There are 9 important gods. There are a lot of important gods in Egyptian mythology. There are an estimated 2,000 deities in their religion. And there are a lot of important ones. I'm not going to cover most of the side characters. I'm going to go straight to a kind of very important group of them called the Aeneid. And they're like the major ones, but not always. So the Aeneid starts. There's Shu and Tefnut. You can't see my finger. There's Shu and Tefnut. And then there's also Nut and Geb. They were the first 4 in the Aeneid. There are 5 others. And they are their children. And they are... So Osiris, he was originally like the pharaoh. He lived on Earth. Okay, I can't see all the names because I moved this thing. So there's Osiris. There is his wife Isis, also his sister. She is the god of magic, as we mentioned before. There's Set. He is the god of evil and chaos, and he is married to his sister Sekhmet, who is the god of darkness and dusk. Two, very alike people, very good interests, alike interests, as well as a guy named Blind/Old Horus. Not much is known about Blind/Old Horus, but he is born, and then he is immediately killed by his brother Set, because Set don't like him. Osiris, here, wait, what time is it? So, I'm going to go off on some quick mythology. Ready? I'm going to set this up, okay? Osiris, I'm going to set this up. Get ready for this. Osiris lived on Earth. He was the king of the people. He was the first pharaoh. He taught them how to farm, and he and his wife generally were well regarded. People were big fans. And Set was very jealous, and also he was not a good guy. He's a very jelly bro and kind of a jerk. And so Set said, I know what I'll do. I'll kill my own brother. And so for a party, Osiris was going to return to the realm of the gods. And Set had his measurements secretly taken, and he built a chest. And there was this chest, and at the party he said, "This is a pretty cool chest, right, guys?" And they were all like, "Yeah, that's a neat chest set you got there." And he's like, "Okay, whoever fits in this chest the best will win the chest." And so they were all like, "Yo, that's pretty sick. I'm gonna get in this chest." So they all go in the chest, all the gods, and finally Osiris gets in the chest, and he fits perfectly because his measurements were taken. And Set slams the door and throws him in the Nile. And he's like, "Hey, I'm the king now. That guy's gone." Eventually Isis finds Osiris. And from some turn of events, it changed between myth from myth. Osiris ends up getting left alone. And so Set comes around and he's like, "You found my brother? Well, you won't take him alive." And he just cuts him into 14 pieces, and he throws them everywhere. And he's like, "You'll never get him back. He's all in pieces." And so Isis flies around. She's like, "Oh, where is my husband?" And eventually she finds her husband with the help of Sekhmet and Ra, and Anubis. And I'll talk about them, though. And they find all his pieces, and they wrap him back up into a mummy. And then she puts a last bit of life in him, and she gets pregnant with a baby who will become Horus. So basically, where was I? So Osiris ends up being the king of the dead world, the underworld, and the final judger. And basically, Horus becomes eternal enemies with Set, and Horus becomes the king of the gods, and he's like the spiritual embodiment of all the pharaohs. All the pharaohs say, "Hey, I'm connected to that dude. That's why you should bow down to me." Because he's pretty sick, right, guys? So that's Egyptian mythology. Ta-da! Okay, now the thing that we're going to do. Anyone want to read the slide, or should I?
I don't mind. So basically, we want you to design your own god. Like, think of something in your life that doesn't have to be like a major thing, like the sun or the sky. And you can make a god for it, and come up with kind of like who the god is. Like, are they an important god? Like, they could be the king of the gods, or they could be like a minor god. Are they like a good, kind god, or are they a cruel god? And you can draw a picture. And then if you have extra time, you can also maybe think about other gods that might be like interacting with yours and kind of make it a little pantheon. But for the time we have now, just
We
work
get to
on
do
a primary
drawings!
god. Yes, you get to draw this time.
I'm very excited. I'll stop
And
sharing.
at the end, we can kind of share a little bit if you want.
So you can get something to draw on. I have you can't see it. It's Fanboy and Chum Chum now. But it's paper. Ta-da!
Draw yourself a little god.
I'm gonna be drawing
So-
myself a little god, and it's gonna be better than all of yours because
I'm
I
also
know
gonna draw this god.
more. I'm a smarter one. I'm just kidding. But if you're better than me, then you're gonna kick you out of the class. So make a god, and you can feel free to draw him if you like drawing. If you don't like drawing, then you can think about him. I don't know. But we want to see your
We've got
drawings.
a stock
'cause
image off the internet. If
you could
want
also
to
get a stock image off the internet.